Hey, welcome to How to Study the Bible for Yourself. So in Mark chapter 7 for today, you're going to look for repeated phrases and repeated words. The first part of chapter 7 is a lot of repeated words. The word tradition comes up a lot. All right. So it's in it's in verse 3, it's in verse 4, it's in verse 5, it's in verse number 8, it's in verse number 9, it's in verse number 13. Okay. And so Jesus' issues that he has is with tradition that isn't backed up by reality. He says, you leave the commandment of God. If when you're trying to figure out what is it saying, when you're interpreting, you do these three questions, right? So what does it say? Well, we notice the tradition, and we notice that he says they leave the commandment of God in verse number 8, and it says in verse number 13, you make void the commandment of God. In verse number 9, he says you reject the commandment of God. So Jesus is not against traditions. He's not against even like regulations about what we do and how we live our life. What he's against here is leaving God's commandment and establishing a system from people alone and from tradition alone in its place. As a replacement for God's truth and God's commandment, tradition's pretty empty. And so that is the challenge that he has with the Pharisees. So the three questions you ask is, what does it say? What does it mean? What does it mean to me? Okay, what does it say? Content. What does it mean? Interpretation. What does it mean to me? Application. CIA. All right. So the CIA method of interpreting Scripture. Content. What does it say? Interpretation. What does it mean? Application. What does it mean to me? So content is where you look and you just identify patterns, you identify major words, you identify all of that. Interpretation is, let's try to draw out principles. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, universal principle situation, but so you draw out principles. What are the overarching principles here? And then application is where you say, how do I apply that? So what should I do? If this principle is true, what would it look like for me to put that into practice in my life? All right. So that is how you do it. The CIA method of interpretation. Content. Look at interpretation. What does it mean? And thirdly, what does it mean to me? That's application. All right. Talk to you tomorrow.